As for anyone who disagrees with him is called either dumb, a liar, or an asshole. Usually all three. Yeah, well, eventually that's what it does come down to. It's not my first reflex, but yeah, I mean, as soon as I've identified you as a purveyor, a seller of intellectual snake oil, that's right, I'm going to label you something. I'm going to label you something pretty damn negative, and that's all you're doing. This is religion, not even disguised, being sold though as a cure to the dilemma of human existence. And it's not a cure. It's the same poison that human beings have fucked themselves over with for 10,000 years. It's just another lie. Period. Okay, and then some asshole says, yeah, oh yeah, Helicon. Yeah, well stated about Gary the egotist. Right, I'm the egotist, and you're the guy sitting there glorifying human life. That makes a lot of sense. But anyway. All right, so the other remarks I want to get to were on a Modern Mystic video, and they were by Jasper, and so they were pretty revealing. Okay, so the Modern Mystic basically challenged him. He's got to come up with a very good argument to convince people that there's some other truth. And so Jasper says, one hell of a good argument is merely that which is most logically consistent. I have explained numerous times in depth that there is no objective basis in the comment that suffering is important. Well, you can keep saying there isn't, but you haven't demonstrated that there isn't. So that's bullshit. You haven't explained how it can't be true, number one. And number two, you haven't undone what has been stated as a reason to believe it, which is first, the information we acquire through our own subjective experience. We know what suffering is. We know how unpleasant it is through our personal experience. Number two, we see it in all these other sentient creatures that obviously they are giving every indication of enduring something that is not good by our known knowledge of that unpleasant feeling. And that the word unpleasant itself has meaning. We have described what it is to feel that negative thing. All right, you haven't undone the fact that a feeling has a quality, a positive or a negative quality. You haven't explained how they are equal. That I could create two universes where every molecule is screaming in agony, and another universe where every molecule was in delirious orgasmic pleasure. And by your fucktarded logic, those two universes could not be distinguished by an intelligence. That is insane. Plainly insane, insipid, nonsensical mush. All right. Suffering, blah, 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 blah. Gary has outright said, alluded to, or implied that the premise is that is not founded on anything concrete other than personal opinions of what is good and bad. I've never said that. We're going to have arguments about what we personally experience and what we put on the scales. But I've always made the contention that there's a truth out there about how fucktarded we were, or are. Because I have attempted to explain that the 8-ball, the screwball in the game, is the fact that desire corrupts our perception. It makes us think something that's not good is good. All right, that's called addiction. We are addicted, and that addiction makes it difficult for a human being to even subjectively know what they're feeling, to really know it for what it is, because they have no unaddicted reference to compare it to. But the fact that it is negative can be appreciated even in our worst addiction. But anyway, all right, so the Modern Mystic challenges him again to say something meaningful. All right, so Jasper says, well, for one, it means Gary, fundamentalists of all stripes and colors, vegetarians, etc., all have to get off their high horse and realize that they are making personal decisions in regards to value, and that demonizing the rest of us is incredibly pointless, as the same argument can be thrown back at them given the subjective nature of this entire argument. All right, so now he's also comparing vegetarianism. So that's essentially like saying the the movement to liberate the slaves was a fucking waste of time. They had no right to argue against slavery. It's the same argument. Because people perceived and recognized the reality that what they were doing was wrong, that they were causing suffering to other human beings, and they acknowledged the humanness of those humans that they had, you know, maligned with bullshit, with nonsense, with lies, with distortions of truth, with just utter crap. You know, they had to dismiss their reality. And essentially this is the same argument that vegetarian is making. It's essentially the same argument. They're just saying, well, look, you know, we figured out that other human beings are human. Well, now let's look at these other sentient creatures and let's acknowledge their sentience, and let's acknowledge the only thing that makes us important is our capacity to be harmed. And they're capable of being harmed. So they've got to have some importance also. I mean, maybe they don't have to have a good life in suburbia to be happy. They don't need the same treatment as a human being, because a human being is a much more complex psychology. But the fact of the matter is they can be harmed. And it's a valid argument to be made. And this asshole calls that the high horse argument. He calls that the nobleman on his big, fat, arrogant horse talking down. No, that's the peasant's view. That's the humble human who's willing to give up something. He's not riding the horse. He's feeding the horse. You're the arrogant fucker on the high horse. You're the abuser justifying your abuse. Okay, there was one more really good one in here. Whether or not they will change their minds' actions after being well informed of the invalidity of their worldview is another question entirely. Yeah, well informed by nothing. You haven't said anything, but you've contended that value isn't an objective truth, and you've just said it. You haven't backed it up with a motherfucking thing. It's just like saying there is a God, and you're obliging me to prove there isn't? No, prove the existence of your non-existent feelings, okay? My evidence is pretty damn clear. I know what the feelings are. I've had them, okay? I've seen them. You can't tell me they don't exist with no evidence. You have to tell me with some sort of evidence why I shouldn't believe my own fucking senses. Good. I'm trying to explain that the argument has been given via the reductio ad absurdum. Oh no, your argument is reductio ad absurdum. Okay? Let's take it to its logical conclusion. If there's no such thing as suffering that means anything objectively, then harm can't mean anything objectively. All right, so then what thing in this world should we ever argue about? I mean, if every argument can have no good or bad outcome, if there is no good or bad choice in reality, then why would we argue about anything ever? Then every argument is just like an argument like, I'm a heterosexual, I think heterosexuality is better, and I'll argue with some homosexual will say homosexuality is better, and we'll just argue about something completely nonsensical. That would turn every argument, every discussion would be entirely pointless if it had no truth consequence. If there was no truth to be discovered or to be revealed or to be advocated for, no argument would have any goddamn purpose. That is absurd. It is also absurd because if taken to its logical conclusion, you would have to concede that I could build two universes, one that was entirely full of suffering, one that was entirely full of pleasure, and you are arguing that an intelligence could only make a subjective decision about which one was better. He could not possibly make, an intelligence could not possibly make an objective, rational, logical decision and say that one of those two universes was a better choice. That's the absurdity of your fucking rhetoric, of your fucking principles, of your fucking nonsense. So you failed dismally on that score. Let's see, where's the rest of this one? All right, as well as the inability for value statements to be proven objectively. Proven objectively. What the fuck does that mean? Proof is proof, okay? There's no such thing as objective or subjective proof. There is proof, all right? And it's to a standard. I mean, we've been through this, but I gotta go through it again, apparently. We have a trial, there's a standard of proof. Depending on how big the punishment's gonna be, it's a higher standard or a lower standard, okay? But proof is applied by a standard of proof. A standard of reasonableness, a standard of there's nothing else that could possibly be the explanation kind of standard. Okay? There's no other possible explanation than the fact that suffering has a negative component, a negative weight, a negative value and meaning. There's just no other logical fucking statement. Suffering doesn't matter is not a logical statement. It doesn't make any sense to to anyone who has experience with it. There's no fucking way they would say something that's stupid. So it's you know, it's idiotic. And then again, it's not objective proof. I'm just saying I have the proof. I mean, the proof is in our own personal experience, and I can make the logical argument based on evolution that this negative force is somehow compelling organisms to behave very differently than they would if they didn't have that negative force compelling them. So you can keep saying it's a positive force or it's a neutral force, but if it was a neutral or it was a positive, then there's no way it would be able to steer organisms to do other things. So there's no possibility. There's the logic right in front of you. And you have done nothing to defeat either my personal experience with sentience or to defeat my point that every creature that possesses it is obviously moved by it, and they're moved by it rationally and logically because it does something to force them away. It is a repulsive force.